Good evening. My name is Amy Carl, representing the League of Women Voters of the Houston area. Conversations with the Candidates is sponsored by both the League of Women Voters of the Houston area and Houston Media Source. Our first candidate joining us tonight for Texas Congressional District 22 is Shree Kulkarni. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight.
Thank you for having me on.
So please, by means of introduction, tell us about yourself.
Sure. I grew up here in the Houston area. I actually was zoned to the Sharpstown High School, but got bused across town to Lamar High School on Westheimer. After high school, I went to University of Texas at Austin, where I did Plan 2, and then I went on to the Foreign Service for 14 years, where I served in Taiwan, Russia, Israel, Iraq, and Jamaica. I spent a year working for Senator Kirsten Gillibrand from New York. And then I spent a year at Harvard in their mid-career Master's in Public Administration program. And I was in the State Department planning to go out to serve in India until this past December, when I decided that I could not continue to work for the Trump administration. And so I resigned to come back here and run for office, because the things that I saw coming out of this administration were beyond politics for me, beyond left and right or normal Democrat, Republican. There were just certain things that I couldn't represent abroad as an American. They were anti-American, and I find immoral.
Thank you so much. We'll jump into the questions now. First and foremost, Congress has struggled for some time now with how to tackle immigration reform. What does that phrase immigration reform mean to you, and what do you think is the first step towards a workable solution?
So immigration reform is very complicated, but that's why we need a comprehensive immigration reform. We have to take into account the realities that we have. We have a 2,000-mile long border. We have needs for labor along the border. So, for example, migrant labor needs. When there are crackdowns on illegal immigration in the agricultural sector, you see what happens. There's not enough labor to actually pick these crops. On the other hand, in some areas where we need to make sure that our fair labor standards are being applied, for example, people coming in to undercut union labor from shops and other places, we need to make sure that those standards are high. And then at the high end, the H-1B program, for example, we need to make sure that we cut down a lot of this red tape. I did visas, I did 40,000 visas when I was working in Taiwan. And I know that there's people who are waiting years and years and years on H-1Bs. And just recently, a lot of people were under threat of being kicked out of the country simply because they were waiting. They've been here 8, 10 years and never been able to get a green card just because of all the red tape. So there's a lot of different areas that need to be addressed within immigration reform. But probably the biggest issue is DACA. And I don't know if you're going to ask about DACA, but my position on DACA is that families should be able to stay together. And anybody who thinks that that being harsh with families is the right thing to do should look at the actual situation. We have to humanize these things. So a man who's been in this country for 30 years, since he was 10 years old, has a wife and a child who are all American citizens, to kick him out of the country at this point, break him up from his family, and to see what they're going through, I think you would have to be very heartless to say that this is the moral or ethical thing to do. There's got to be something behind our laws. And so if there's no morality or no ethics behind it, then the laws need to change.
Thank you so much. Next, it would be remiss if I didn't ask you about what's on the top of everyone's minds and hearts, which is the recent school shooting in Florida. What do you believe Congress's role should be in addressing gun violence in this country?
I think Congress needs to take a strong role. I think it needs to be bipartisan, because the truth is that I've seen this happen when I worked in the Senate again and again. We have school shootings, we have mass shootings all over this country, and there's a lot of talk, a lot of strong statements, but nothing gets done because, honestly, there's a very powerful lobby opposing any sort of gun safety reform. I think the real issue, we have a lot of gun owners, a lot of very responsible gun owners in Texas who know that there's common sense gun reform that could be made. We know the things we could do. We could have universal registration. We could have universal licensing, universal background checks. We could have insurance on guns. There are many different things that could be done, but the situation we have right now with the Dickey Amendment, we're not even able to study options to research how we could reduce gun violence, because it becomes a political issue. When you inject politics into every issue, then our families are actually the ones that pay the price. There are people on both sides of this issue who care about families and care about children. We just need to get enough people to care about it that we can actually get something done.
Big one. What's your vision for improving the healthcare system in the United States?
So I've served in many different countries around the world, and you can see lots of different healthcare systems. But the thing that all of the developed countries have in common is that there's a universal healthcare system. Now, I know that President Trump said, who knew healthcare could be so complicated? Well, everybody knew healthcare could be so complicated, but there is some very simple mathematics about it. And the simple mathematics is that if everybody is not in the system, then you are going to pay more. Americans pay more, often twice as much for the same procedures as people in other countries that have universal systems. Now, there's many ways to get to universal health care. Medicare for all is one, and I would support that, but there are other systems as well, as long as you make sure that no man, woman, or child is stuck out and has to suffer and die because they're born in the wrong area or have the wrong level of income. I know this personally. When my dad was dying of cancer here, we maxed out of a very good insurance policy. We maxed out at $1 million within 1 year. We would have been bankrupt after that point because we couldn't afford anything else to pay for my father's health care. And I think it's unconscionable that people are going without health care in one of the richest, most developed countries in the world.
Thank you. Recently, the Department of Education announced that it will no longer investigate civil rights complaints from transgender students barred from school bathrooms that match their gender identity. What is your position on this issue?
I mean, my position on this issue, honestly, is the same as my position on anything where we're talking about equality. There shouldn't be any distinction, whether you're a transgender student or a cisgender student. We should all have the same rights, and it's frankly offensive to me that somebody would say we have to treat a little boy or a little girl in a cruel manner simply because we've injected politics into it again. I really feel that there was a great hysteria that was created around this issue, and it's unconscionable that children are having to suffer because of it. So I would actually absolutely stand up for the rights of transgender students.
Thank you. You've mentioned this briefly before, but I'd like to delve in a little deeper. Our nation is divided by polarizing political rhetoric and leaders in Washington who appear both unwilling and unable to work together much of the time. How would you address this, and how will it affect your approach to representing District 22?
Sure. I mean, this is a great question for me because I struggled with this after the 2016 election. I was crushed, and I didn't know what had happened to my country. And so what I decided to do was I reached out to a Republican colleague, and we started a group called Breaking Bread. We would sit together around a table and have a meal every Friday and just try to understand where we're coming from, not debate each other on issues, but just listen and put ourselves in each other's shoes. The point of that is that our communication media right now force us into this polarized system where we're only tweeting at each other, we're attacking each other on social media, and sometimes we have hostile actors like bots or trolls, sometimes coming in from other countries, who are trying to instill that hostility and that anger in our society. The best way, I think, to get past that is to spend more time listening, talking to people face to face. So if I get into Congress, I'm going to start breaking bread every week in Congress with my colleagues. One of the real problems in Congress today is that members of Congress and senators, they don't talk to each other face to face as much as they used to before. When cameras come into the room, then they are actually talking to their donors and their special interest groups who are watching every single thing they say. That doesn't create a good atmosphere for compromise and getting to workable solutions. And so we need to actually talk to each other more and have relationships across the aisle as human beings and not just as polarized attack dogs.
Excellent. If elected, how would you balance the demands of the congressional calendar with the need to stay in touch with the people of your district and their questions and concerns?
I think that's one of the most difficult things to do. as I just said, you need to spend time in Washington actually getting to know the other members of Congress. But you also have to get back to your district and get up and down the district. I know I've spent a lot of time going up and down my district, which conveniently matches my name, because we have Shree Kulkarni and we have a Sugarland, Pearland, and a Katy region of the district. But it's a lot of time going up and down. And so I think you really have to do a lot of planning. You have to make sure that your schedule is designed in such a way that you can reach out to constituents while you're back here in the district, but you're not sacrificing the time to build those relationships in Washington, because they are very important. And I think those relationships are actually being frayed right now.
And then last but certainly not least, what do you believe are your unique qualifications to serve the folks in District 22?
Sure. Things that I have, one, I have more federal experience than anybody. I don't know if anybody has any federal experience in this slate. I also have legislative experience in the U.S. Senate. And even when I was working in the U.S. Senate, having that federal experience really helped me out a lot, because some of the people who were working in Congress who had never been on the executive side of the aisle, they didn't understand how different agencies cooperated, and so I was able to actually get a major change in policy related to medical marijuana simply because I knew how to get into the State Department. I got a treaty reinterpreted, which I then took to the DEA, and I said, this treaty that you've been using for the last 46 years to prevent medical research has now been reinterpreted, and the DEA changed their policy. So that's one thing that I have unique compared to the other candidates. And the other thing is, having spent my time abroad, especially in conflict zones, I understand how these cycles of hostility spread. And I feel like that's where we're going in this country right now, not to the point of being a war zone, but our society is in conflict. To me, when I resigned from the administration, what I said was, the problem isn't the Trump administration. The problem is the lack of trust here. And I feel Donald Trump is a symptom of that problem. If we can build up the trust in society again, then we can actually come to reasonable solutions. You never start by talking about the end goals that you want to achieve. You start by saying, what do we have in common? So in my campaign, we talk about basic fundamental values: reason, compassion, and decency. These sound like simple things, but I think most people can agree that we don't have enough of them in our government right now, and so those are the things I think should be fundamental, and we should talk about first before we get to our policy differences.
Well, thank you so much for your time. We have just a couple minutes left, so I just wanted to open it up to you if you have anything to say in conclusion.
Yeah, so I would just like to say that it's been really interesting and enjoyable going across my district and talking to people about all of their different concerns, and I've had such a warm response to an optimistic, positive message, because people are tired of all this hyperpolarization, this constantly whipping up of fear and anger, no matter which side you're on. And it's strange to say in a Democratic primary, but actually listening to people who may disagree with you. I talked to a guy who said he was a Tea Party Republican. And I was at a Chamber of Commerce meeting a month ago. And I listened to him for 5 minutes, and I told him, these are my fundamental values. And after 5 minutes, he said, you know what? You've got my vote on March 6th. Because we can do that here. We can actually listen to each other. It doesn't mean that you have to moderate your positions. I'm a very strong and proud progressive. But you have to be willing to listen to people who disagree with you. And if you do, sometimes you'd be surprised that they actually are willing to support you, even though you disagree with them.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. We appreciate your time. Everyone, Shree Kulkarni for Texas Congressional District 22. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Conversations with the Candidates, sponsored by the League of Women Voters of the Houston area and Houston Media Source. With us now is candidate for Texas Congressional District 22, Steve Brown. Steve, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, thank you for having me, first off. My name is Steve Brown, and I am running for Congressional District 22. I have over 20 years of experience in public policy. I currently own a small business in renewable energy efficiency. So we are combating climate change on a personal level and a professional level. And I'm happy to be blessed to be a part of that new industry. But before joining this industry, I was the Texas Railroad Commissioner nominee for the Democratic Party back in 2014, which made me the youngest African American ever to be elected to, or ever to win a statewide race. At 39 at the time. Before that, I served as the chairman of the Fort Bend County Democratic Party. And then prior to that, I worked in the legislature for about 10 years, working on healthcare issues, public transit issues. In fact, the rail line that we are adjacent to, I was at Metro, helped to pull down the federal funding for that, as well as environmental issues as well. I started my career working for, serving in the White House as an intern in the White House in the Clinton White House back in the 1900s. I worked in the Legislative Affairs Office there, and that's really where I really got the taste and the bug to want to serve.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start out by asking you about what's on the top of everyone's hearts and minds, and that is the recent school shooting in Florida. What do you believe should be Congress's role in addressing gun violence?
Congress has failed in its response to gun violence for years now, and not just in schools, but in theaters and every place where people might be vulnerable to attack. And so the first thing we have to do is are the things that folks believe need to get done anyway. I believe there's a 97% approval rating for universal background checks, for instance. So why are we fighting universal background checks when 97% of the people in this country polled agree that that's a good place to start, right? The banning of assault rifles and automatic assault rifles is another good place to start. Even looking at holding gun manufacturers liable for the violence that is caused in the streets. I mean, this is a crisis. We have reached crisis proportions as it relates to gun violence in this country. It is a public health issue as well. 20 years ago, a guy named Dickey out of Arkansas filed an amendment that was adopted that allowed for or prevented the CDC from even studying gun violence in our country. And so the CDC doesn't have the same resources that they had to attack tobacco, for instance, in this war. And a lot of that has to do with the power of the NRA and its special interest and its lobby. But if you strip the NRA away from this debate, even responsible gun owners agree that comprehensive gun violence legislation is needed in this country.
Thank you. Congress has also struggled for some time with comprehensive immigration reform. First, what does that phrase mean to you? And second, what do you think is the first step?
Well, comprehensive immigration reform reaches a variety of different areas of entry into the country and a variety of different regulations on people and how they enter the country and what type of permits or license or cards that they may have while they're here. So it is just that. It's a comprehensive view of our immigration policy. Unfortunately, I fear that too much of the policy is driven by racism, quite frankly. I believe that as immigrants got browner, our compassion for migrants has changed. When immigrants came from Eastern European countries, I don't think that the American people, save past the 1920s to 30s, treated those immigrants the same way they treat browner people who are migrating either across the border or however they're coming through the country. And so I think that we have to first establish that there is a racist tinge to this conversation. And we have to remove racism out of it and put in its place compassion and empathy, put in its place the understanding that people want and deserve a better way of life, that they want their children to live a better life than perhaps they were given themselves. And so they're bringing their children to the land of opportunity. And America cannot stop being that land of opportunity. That's our responsibility to bear as a country with such great resources and such great promise, that promise should be shared for any immigrant looking to find a better way of life. Unfortunately, there are some immigrants who are kind of caught in this tangled web of not being able to become a citizen. And so they're stuck in this middle ground. And so a comprehensive immigration reform approach has to look at what we do with the folks who are here, as well as the folks who want to come to the country, because overall, the vast majority of the people who come to this country have made a productive difference in this country, have contributed to the betterment of this country. And if we take racism away from that, I think we can see the contribution that immigrants are making right now.
Thank you. While we're speaking about immigration, what is your position on DACA?
So DACA is a very personal issue for me and for the district, because in our district, we have about 5,000 people who are DACA recipients, which is a very high number. That specific, drilling down to the specifics of the district, 5,000 people are eligible to be recipients of DACA. And so we have 5,000 people right now in my district who can't plan for the summer, because they don't know where they will be this summer. They don't know where they'll be this spring. They don't know where they'll be this fall. And that's unfair to them. I believe that we have to institute some pathway to citizenship for DACA recipients. If you are a DACA recipient, then you've already proven and you've shown that you're a productive member of the society, and you're not a criminal, you're not a part of a gang, right? You cannot be a part of a gang and a DACA recipient at the same time. And so, for those 5,000 people, and for the many more thousands of people who love them, in the district, we have to do what we can to protect them and give them the peace of mind of knowing that they can live in this country and they too are Americans.
Thank you. Healthcare reform is something that Congress has grappled with for many years now. What is your vision for improving the American healthcare system? Well,
so you have to remember that I actually was the lead champion, the lead analyst for the Texas Medical Association back in 2003, and I worked on Medicaid and CHIP issues. So no one in this race, and quite frankly, not many people in the state have the depth of knowledge around financing of healthcare systems in our country, particularly in this state. And it is not an easy task to try to bear because of the misunderstandings of the Medicaid and the CHIP system here in Texas. I believe, and I believe most providers would say the same thing, at least they would whisper in my ear these things, and we got to get them to be more vocal and public about saying them openly. But the providers, whether they're hospitals or doctors, they want a system of universal health care. Because they know the difficulty of trying to work with HMOs on getting paid on a prompt basis for their side of the aisle, or they know the difficulty of providing care that then is uncompensated. And the problem of the compensated care in this state is great because we have such a high number of uninsured people in this state. And so when hospitals take people in because they have to take people in, people who don't have insurance still get sick. This is something that I believe is missing in this discussion, is that even if you don't think someone should get insurance, that does not mean they don't still get sick. And when they get sick, they still get treated. And when they get treated, someone has to pay for that, right? And so the ideal of the Affordable Care Act was that people would have a health care home that pays for not only the treatments when they get sick, but preventative treatments as well, because we know prevention is much more cost efficient than treatment. Treatment is the highest way, the most expensive way to pay for health care. So the ideal of the Affordable Care Act was to give people health care homes so that they don't have to get sick, go to the emergency room, can't pay their bills, and then we pay their bills through our property taxes and our premium increases within HMOs, within the private sector. And so even if you take the position that, folks, they're on their own, if they don't have insurance, too bad for them, you still pay for their care because they will still get sick, and when they get sick, someone will decide to pay for that. So the best policy that I strongly believe that we have to pursue in this country is moving towards a Medicare for all system of healthcare, finance, and I believe that's important for many reasons. But for three, the free market system, as it relates to healthcare. In fact, the free market system as it relates to three things: prisons, healthcare, and schools, I think is a failure. I don't think that that is a good fit for the free markets. But for healthcare, when you look at the populations of people who aren't as attractive in the free market as they would be in a public system, there are the elderly, the sick, and the poor. The elderly, sick, and the poor will never make for a good investment for an HMO, right? And they know that. That's why they put caps in place. That's why they restrict people with pre-existing conditions, because they consider those people to be sick people. And they can't make profits off of sick people. They can't make profits off of poor people. They can't make profits off of elderly people. So we have to understand that in order for us to make sure that everyone has access not only to health care, but to improve quality of life so that they can live their purpose and their dream. And you may never know that their dream, their purpose might be something that can help us along the way, but they couldn't get there because they got sick and they couldn't pay for their health care, and it diminished their quality of life. So we have to think in terms of a Medicare for all system and begin taking immediate steps towards that end.
Thank you so much. Recently, the Department of Education announced that it will no longer investigate civil rights complaints from transgender students who have been barred from entering school bathrooms that match their gender identity. What is your position on this issue?
My position is that Republicans have made this a wedge issue in our country, and it's a silly wedge issue to be talking about. I will fight, I will fight to the end to make sure that LGBTQ members of our society have equal rights in this society, and I don't appreciate the Republicans using them as a wedge issue, and that's been kind of the way that they kind of done things. They create these wedge issues, and they get people all fired up, and they want them to vote on those few wedge issues, and distract them from the fact that if you look at the issues that matter in someone's home, right, for instance, those 5, 6, 7 key issues that really mean the difference for their families, a bathroom bill isn't a part of that mix, right? But yet we elevate it to be one of those issues that we have to always talk about because Republicans are putting it on the agenda. We have to stop playing games with people's lives. We have to make sure that everyone is treated just, that we have a society that can champion and support people of all backgrounds, and folks should feel free to go to any bathroom that they want to go to.
Thank you. We've just now touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to delve a little bit deeper. Our nation is divided by polarizing political rhetoric and leaders in Washington who appear either unwilling or unable to work together the bulk of the time. If elected, how will you address this issue, and how will it affect your approach to representing your district?
Yeah, so, I believe that most issues are nonpartisan. Most issues are nonpartisan. The issues we spend a lot of time talking about happen to be those issues that are partisan. But hurricanes are nonpartisan issues. Gun violence is a nonpartisan issue. Healthcare is truly a nonpartisan issue. Republicans and Democrats get sick, right? Yes, we have to be able to strip away the partisanship out of this, which is something that is a person-to-person type of a skill, a relational skill set that members of Congress need to go there wanting to get to know people as people and not as labels. I saw that personally. When I worked in the Clinton White House, I told you I worked in the Legislative Affairs Office, which dealt directly with Congress. And so my role in legislative affairs was to correspond with the U.S. House of Representatives. I did not see one Republican the entire time I served in the White House, not one. And that turned me off from D.C. And I later went to work for Sylvester Turner in Austin, and I came in with that kind of D.C. mindset that we're kind of rigid and, we're on our side and they're on our side. And that was Austin before Austin now. Austin now is more like D.C. But I quickly learned that some of my very best friends were Republicans. And we could fight in committee, we could fight on the floor, but yet then we can go have a beer afterwards and talk about everything but politics. And that's important. We could go play basketball on Saturday mornings and just be friends, right? And that helped us to really get to figure out, okay, if we have 10 issues that we're dealing with and we can't agree on 7, but there's those 3 that we can agree on, let's do that. Let's work together on those 3. And you can't do that if there's no basis of a relationship to begin with. And I think the failure of Washington, D.C. is that people come in without a basis of friendship and relationships with people on the other side. And we have to break through that because, as I said, most of the issues that they deal with in D.C. aren't really partisan issues at all.
Thank you. We have a couple minutes left, so I'd like to pose one last question to you and then sort of wrap it into a conclusion. What do you feel are your unique qualifications to serve the people of your district?
Well, and I think you put it the right way. The service of the people is the first key qualification. I've been in the district for over 10 years now, and I've been serving in the district, not in some other place in the country or in the state, but in the district, both as the party chairman of the Fort Bend County Democratic Party, which means that I've probably knocked on more doors and block walked and phone banked for other candidates than I have for myself over those 10 years. But I carry that as a badge of honor. Even when I'm not on the ballot, even when I'm not running for anything, even when I don't have any desire to run for something, I'm still engaged in the district. When folks in eastern Fort Bend County had an issue with cancer and potentially a cancer cluster in their community, I took that very seriously. And I made sure that folks from the Sierra Club, the Environmental Defense Fund, and all those stakeholders in the environmental community were able to come down and lend their resources to make sure that we weren't sitting on or standing on a time bomb, a ticking time bomb, as related to the contamination of the water in that area. Those are things that I did in the community without recognition, and not for recognition, but because no one else stood up to make a stand. When we had a rally for Medicare for All last summer in Sugar Land, I wanted to make sure that we raised that issue because I was tired of Republicans owning the message on health care. And at that point in time, that they were in the middle of the repeal effort of the ACA. But we weren't talking about our solutions. We weren't talking about where we were before the ACA. Because before the ACA, we had a public option as a part of that legislation. And then that got dropped off because we wanted Republican votes. We never got those Republican votes. And so we never went back to talk about the public option and more universal type of health care. Because even under the ACA, there's 20 million people who still wouldn't be insured. And so I felt it was important for us to raise awareness in suburban Houston to talk about these issues. And so a mentor of mine said that before you can serve the people, you have to serve the people. And I take that very seriously. And I've committed my life work to do that, both professionally in terms of the issues that I've got paid on to work on, which is a win-win situation, but also personally. And not only that, just serving on boards in the community, being a youth coach in the community. That's important. If we're going to send somebody to Washington, D.C. to serve folks, that's some 1,200 miles away, we have to know and trust that we know who they are before we send them over there.
Please feel free to conclude this segment with anything you would like to say to your...
I have carte blanche. Oh, that's scary. Okay. No, seriously. So District 22, although many people know it as Tom DeLay's old district, and we kind of see it as a suburban, master plan communities and all that fun stuff, there are real challenges that are very specific to 22, whether it's with regards to healthcare. There are 44,000 people in this district who are currently enrolled in the ACA. That's the second highest number in the state. 44,000 people in this district are enrolled in the ACA, the second highest number in the state. No one would think of suburban Fort Bend County and Brazoria as the hotbed for ACA enrollment, but that is where it is. 44,000 people. The DACA situation, 5,000 people. If you look at Hurricane Harvey, we lost 18,000 homes, 9,000 in Fort Bend, 9,000 in Brazoria. In this district, 18,000 homes in this district. Right now, we have an issue with the Canyon Gate community that were adjacent to the Parker Reservoir. So when the reservoir overflowed, or when the Army Corps of Engineers allowed for the water to come out, it went into those homes. And so there are and then transportation. I mentioned earlier that I was in Metro, working in DC and in Austin to build out the current rail lines that we have right now. When these rail lines were on the ballot, a Fort Bend line was included on the referendum that was passed to allow these lines to come to existence. These lines came to existence, the Fort Bend line got forgotten. And that's a shame. And so, yes, we do need more mobility out into the suburbs, both into Brazoria County and into Fort Bend County. So when you look holistically at the specifics of the district and you match those specifics to my resume and what I've done, I think that you can find no better match in this work. Not only that, but if you look at the work that Pete Olson does on energy and commerce, that committee is all about telecommunications, energy. I'm an energy guy, I'm a clean energy guy, so there's a difference there. Public health goes to that committee, and other issues that really relate better to my background and allows for me to speak on those issues. But we have to tear through the labels as we go to November, and we have to be able to show people who vote against their interests that the progressive values that I'm talking about really works for them as well. And that means we have to have a conversation and we have to build relationships at the local level.
Well, thank you so very much for joining us this evening. Please stay tuned for our final candidate. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Conversations with the Candidates, sponsored by the League of Women Voters of the Greater Houston Area and Houston Media Source. Joining us now is Mark Gibson, candidate for Texas Congressional District 22. Mark, please introduce yourself.
Well, thank you, and I didn't get your name, but let me say I'm honored to be here and to the League of Women Voters. To all of the viewers, I'm Mark Gibson, again, run for Congress, District 22. I'm a product of the foster care system. I'm born and raised in a small town in Natchez, Mississippi. I think will be a role model of a lot of people, inspire them of what it takes to come from ground zero to where I am today. I had the privilege of I would say my first foray in some type of politics was in high school when I was serving on the Mayor Youth Council, and we had an issue where we had two proms, one for whites, one for blacks at our high school in the 80s, and I fought that to the city council that we should have a policy where it's fair for both groups. When I also served in the National Government Affairs, also served as a senator from my high school, and we had an opportunity to take up a state one day. When I had my 12-hour bus trip to here, and into Houston, and I was accepted at the University of Houston. I ran for the senator from the College of Business Administration and became a member of the Student Association. So I won that seat. That was the first time. And then when I bought my first home, we had an issue in our neighborhood, and I became the president of our civic club. And the issue was very difficult. It was hurting home values. It was an issue that should not be incurred in a district, and so when I became president, we implemented these restrictions and we eliminated the issue. When I bought my second home, I became a member, was elected to the Homeowners Association, Calling and Crossing Homeowners Association, and served won every term, re-election, and also became vice president of the HOA. And so when I moved into the district several years ago, I decided to run for this seat, District 22. I ran in 2014. We lost in the primary. I felt we didn't do the best job. We owed to our supporters. And so I ran again in 2016. And we won the Democratic primary. We have the highest vote total since Pete's been in office on the Democratic side in the primary. Over 30,000, right? 30,000 people voted. We captured 77% of the vote. And then I am the only candidate who actually faced Pete Osen in the fall. And on record now, we have the highest vote total on the Democrat side since Pete's been in office. We actually cracked the 41% mark. Now, we still fell short, and that's the reason why I'm running again. We're going to close the deal. We're going to win the seat. And so I'm proud to say that. But a little bit about my background. So I served in the State House. I was Chief of Staff for State Representative Harold Dutton in the 87th session, and there were 2 special sessions. The state had a serious crisis during the time. I had a chance to work with Harold on a number of issues, did the research for him. One of the issues that he's probably proud of that he passed was the issue around pre-needs for families who will buy pre-need for burial insurance and only to find out that when they need the policy was no good. And so that was a real issue because there's a way it's regulated by the banking department. So we were able to adopt legislation from the Republican-controlled House in Nebraska. They had passed a similar issue. That was able to adopt that particular legislation. It's actually has become law. It's actually on the books today. So basically, there's a guarantee fund set in place that if a family has one of these policies and the policies has no value to it, then the Funeral Commission will allow them to tap into this guarantee fund. I've served in the military. I'm a 30-year Army veteran. I had the chance to have 5 commands. I've had the honor and privilege of sending troops in harm's way. I was a Medical Service Corps officer, so I was a hospital commander and also a brigade commander. I'm a recipient of the Legion of Merit Award, which is the highest award most reserve officers can receive, signed by a 3-star. I have had the chance to attend law school. I'm a licensed attorney. I'm also a small business owner. In fact, I own a funeral home. And so I've had the privilege to do a number of things. I'm a graduate of the University of Houston with an IT background, Management Information Systems. And I'm also a graduate of the United States Army War College with a degree or a master's in strategic studies. So a little bit about Mark Gibson, a little bit about my family. So we lost my dear wife in 2013. And so I've been mom and dad for the past 5 years almost. Lost her to cancer, Althea. I was married for just 1 month short of 20 years, and I knew Althea for 27 years. We had 3 great kids. My oldest son just graduated in December from Texas Tech University, so guns up. So I'm proud of him. He's going to be a future movie director. My middle son is a Bearcat at Sam Houston State University, and my daughter is a starting varsity basketball player at the Ridge Point High School. So a little bit about Mark Gibson. Right, and that's a little bit about why I was running, and actually what got me in the race was really when our current congressman thought it was okay to vote against $450 million in veterans benefits. And I know firsthand, by serving in the military for 30 years, we had a number of our soldiers who served in Afghanistan, who served in Iraq, that came back suffering PTSD. A lot of them, unfortunately, would end up on food stamps. They came back to a broken family. So we had to deal with a lot of this. And unfortunately, a lot of them committed suicide. And so that was a real problem. We had a real crisis on hand. And so it was just a real issue. And I felt I wanted to continue to serve when I retired from the military. And so part of that issue was serving in Congress and ensuring that our troops were taken care of and that we didn't have a congressman who would shake their hands, look in their face, and then vote on record in the House against benefits that are dear to them.
Well, thank you again so very much for joining us this evening. I'd like to kick off the questions with one that's at the top of everyone's hearts and minds recently, and that is the school shooting in Florida. What do you believe should be Congress's role in curbing gun violence in this country?
Well, it's a good question, right? It was an issue that was a part of our platform in 2016, and that was supporting the president. So it was really just the basics, because one of the big issues, so District 22 is obviously a somewhat conservative district, a very diversified district, but it's a moderate conservative district. All right, so and so to get that message across to our voters, that became an issue because obviously the NRA and others, they do a very good job of always tying into the Second Amendment. And so I have to stress to people, I'm from Mississippi, so I love to hunt, and my brother and I always look forward to the opportunity to go hunting with him. And so it has nothing to do with the Second Amendment. And so we had to stress that to people. And so what I supported in 2016, what the President Obama was pushing, was a very simple background check. Because it covered two things. One was simply that if the Social Security Administration has deemed that you're incompetent, that you need a guardian to handle your affairs, then you should not have a weapon. That was one. That's what the President did with the background check. The second was to close the loophole to not allow you to go to a gun show and buy a weapon and avoid the background check, because that's one way you can slip in. And so that's a tie into people who have mental issues, you know, the Hickneys of the world. So I pushed for, in the 2016 campaign, was the background checks that the President proposed. I will, again, push for the same thing. As you know, the President seems to be, has reversed the role now, because the first time he took office, he decided to undo what the President put in place, his predecessor. And so I'm going to be a strong advocate to push for background checks as a start and ensure that we're not going to allow folks who have mental issues to have a weapon. The second issue now on the table is assault weapons, and so I'll be pushing that. I think we start there as well, that you shouldn't have to, you don't need an assault weapon, and we should have legislation in place that based on a certain age or whatever, you can't buy an assault weapon.
Thank you. Another issue that Congress has grappled with for some time is healthcare reform. What's your vision for improving the healthcare system?
Good question. So again, in 2016, so I was a big advocate of the ACA, right? That was ensuring that the Affordable Care Act stayed in place. One of the big issues that our district faces is we have a lot of small businesses. So the ACA had a mandate that basically you had to pay a penalty if you did not participate in the plan. And so I heard it from small business owners. And so that was their biggest concern about paying this penalty or getting penalized. I had one business owner, he had paid $8,000 penalty because he didn't participate. So what my proposal in 2016, and now, as you know, the Trump administration has removed this mandate along with the Republicans, but basically was to remove the mandate, but so they wouldn't get penalized. So my proposal in 2018, or actually the 2019 session, would be to always strengthen the ACA, but at the same time, make it doable for our small business owners to participate. So don't penalize them, but give them some incentive that they can participate.
Thank you so much. I'd like to speak with you now on immigration. Comprehensive immigration reform. What does that mean to you, and what do you think the first step to accomplish it is?
Okay, well, to me, the comprehensive immigration is just a variety of immigration issues combined into one bucket, right? I mean, obviously, let me just start. I won't be a supporter of the wall, right? Because I think Beto said it best, who's running for the Senate. There's no history of any terrorists ever come across the Mexican border. Right. So first, my support would be, I'm not supporting the wall. I don't think it's necessary. I think we had to be fair across the board. We can't pick and choose. I mean, our country is a melting pot of immigrants, including our current president from his family. So I think we have to have a fair immigration policy. So I'm going to be first, fair immigration. I think DACA is another issue that I'm going to protect the DACAs. I mean, in this district, there's 6,000 DACA recipients that basically are protected right now. And obviously we have, this is up in the air right now, about 1,000 of them are high school graduates. In fact, compared to Harris County, the number is something like 68,000 who fall in that category, and about 8,000 of them are eligible for high school. Now, the district includes Harris County, so that's the reason I mentioned that. But the point is that I think it has to be a fair policy across the board that touches all. I think we can't allow the president to pick and choose. You know, today he doesn't like the Haitians, so they go out. You know, tomorrow maybe somebody else. So I think we have to have a fair policy that makes sense and that we don't discriminate against people and we protect the DACAs.
Thank you. Recently, the Department of Education announced that it will no longer investigate civil rights complaints from transgender students who are not allowed to use the bathroom of their gender identity. What is your position on this issue?
Well, it's interesting. So, you know, the way I address it is simply that we as the Democrats and the Democratic Party should not allow the Republicans to dictate an agenda item that's only used as a divisive means to divide people. The transgender issue is one that comes down to discrimination, and I'm going to be a supporter of protecting or basically ensuring they're not discriminated against. But it's not an issue that we're going to put at the forefront because there's a lot more pressing issues, and we're just not going to allow them to dictate an agenda that basically is to divide and conquer folks.
Thank you. We have just a couple minutes left, so please feel free to conclude how you see fit.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity. Let me just highlight as to why I'm the strongest candidate in this race, right? And I think first we start, I'm the only candidate who has a voting history in the district. I thought one of the opponents had a voting history. It turns out that's not the case. So I think it starts there, you know, living in a district but having voting history in the district. I think that's key. And the reason why I say that, what we don't want, we can't take a chance. We're on the cusp of winning this race. And I can tell you when I won in the primary in 2016, the Republicans were concerned, specifically with military background and with my track record and pedigree against a Pete Olson. But this time around, obviously there's grave concerns that if I am competing against them in the fall. And I think what we have to do is not lose the opportunity to win the seat and flip it for the Democrats. Also what's at stake is that almost every race is affected by District 22 in Fort Bend County. So if we win 22, basically you can flip the seat, you can flip the county to blue. So it starts in this race, and it starts with the strongest candidate who does not create ammunition for our Republicans to question you don't have a voting history in this district. And so, but second, I would say strong legislative background. Again, I know the district quite well because I've walked the district when I campaigned in 2016 and campaigned in 2014. I know the issues that matter most, from Ellerton Field to Thompson, from Webster, Texas to Katy, areas like the Sienna Plantation, the Riverstones, and you name it, very moderate areas that they're looking for a candidate who is basically in the middle, that would balance issues on both sides, and that are going to tackle issues that are critical like flood control. So I'll leave on this note. I'm the only candidate that has concrete proposals when I get to Congress in 2019. The first thing I plan on doing is working with our Republicans on the other side and the president to earmark $1 billion set aside for District 22. It covers 3 counties. It is for flood control improvements. And why I get that earmark, I plan on add another $1 billion for startup firms, for entrepreneurs and startup firms in the areas of science and technology. Now, there will be stipulations around this that basically your firm has to be in the district or has presence in the district. I mean, jobs have to be created in the district. So all that money would stay in the district. But we had a serious issue with Harvey and with the Brazos River flooding a big portion of the back end of the district. And so that money's earmarked for that. I'm the only candidate that has concrete proposal to do something about that. And so when I get to Congress, that's the first thing I'm going to be doing.
Well, thank you so much again for joining us this evening, Mark, and thank you for joining us, Conversations with the Candidates, sponsored by the League of Women Voters of the Greater Houston Area and Houston Media Source. Again, these have been the candidates for Texas Congressional District 22. Have a great evening.
Thank you.